Welcome to the Rideshare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
So Billy Marsden is the co-founder and COO at Argyle, which offers companies better access to employment data via user consent. Prior to Argyle, Billy focused on early-stage investments in enterprise software and fintech as an investor with F Prime Capital. He also served as VP of Operations with Stratum, where he scaled the company's services divisions through its acquisition. He was also a senior associate consultant with Bain & Company, where he served Fortune 100 companies across tech and retail industries and private equity clients across technology, retail, and CPG verticals. He is a native of San Francisco, and Billy earned his Bachelor of Science in Economics from Duke University. So Billy, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Harry. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. And I think before we get into Argyle, though, I kind of want to start with you because I'm just curious, like, how do you classify your background and experience at a high level? Because to me, it seems like, I would say impressive is one adjective I would use, but there's sort of like, you've got the Bain on your resume and you've got investing on your resume. And, what do you tell people like casually that you do or that is your field of expertise these days?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I would classify my field of expertise as having seen technology from a bunch of different angles. Mm-hmm. I grew up in San Francisco. I moved here as soon as I graduated from college. I love tech. And I've looked at technology from a consulting angle, from an investing angle, from an operating angle, and now from a founding angle. So I've just looked at technology businesses from many different angles and really enjoyed my time here.
Yeah, I like the way you put that, right? Because I sort of see that, even like Bain is a good example, right? They've got a lot of people that come out of there and kind of go into, operating at Uber or founding funds or companies or whatever it might be. So I like that angle of looking through technology, as you put it. And, I guess I could even mention right now that, you first came to me when you were back in your Stratum days, right? So it's kind of funny that you came full circle and now you're working on Argyle with us.
That's right. It's great to be reacquainted in a different arena.
Very cool. So, all right, I've mentioned Argyle a few times, and I'm going to let you, since we've got one of the co-founders on the podcast, I'm going to let you explain, like, what's the quick pitch for Argyle? What is it, and what does it do?
Yeah. What we do with Argyle is we are a user permissioned gateway into employment records.
Got it.
So we make it easy for employees or workers of any type to share their employment records or their work records, and we make it easy for businesses to digest those records or ingest them.
Got it. That's a good explanation. So do you consider it B2C, B2B, combination of both?
Yep, we're a B2B business. So our primary customers are financial institutions, think lenders or banks of any sort, insurance companies, who want to digest work data or employment data, but the end user of the system are consumers or users or people who have employment records who want to share those with the banks or the lenders or the insurance companies.
Got it. So would that technically be business to consumer, B2B to C? Is that what they call it these days?
I think B2B to C has taken on many different flavors, but that is one definition of it, sure.
Got it. So let's move down to the ground level, and maybe we can use an example from the gig economy. Like, what does the product look from the different stakeholders' point of view? Like, maybe imagine I'm a gig worker at one of these companies, and how am I using Argyle, or if I'm a platform, and let's put it into real life.
Sure. I can even start with how we came up with the business, which is a use case that we now serve with Argyle today. So my co-founder Shmolik and I were working together at a business called Stratum, which you mentioned in my introduction. And I ran the services division at Stratum. At Stratum, Stratum was a fleet management company. And as part of that, we performed services for large fleets of vehicles, think rental car companies. We moved cars around, we washed them, and we needed to onboard thousands of contractors to do that work. in order to bring contractors onto our system, they would be driving around other people's cars. We needed to vet them properly. So we needed to ask for a lot of information, name, social, in order to do background checks, DMV driving records, etc. And we like to call our application death by 40 cuts. There were a ton of fields. It took a lot of time. It was very painful for everybody involved. It was painful for us to collect the information. It was painful for the user to provide all this information to us. And we were sitting there thinking to ourselves, all of the people who we're trying to bring onto the system drive for Uber, they drive for Lyft, and all of the information that we would want would be sitting within those platforms. We could turn this 40-click application into a one-click application by having somebody authenticate into their Uber platform or their Lyft platform. We could then pipe all that data over and auto-populate an entire application.
Got it.
So that was actually the genesis of the business and one of the use cases that we continue to serve today.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, no, I think that I like this concept of, I don't know that you would call it leverage or, just sort of using what's already been done. Because I feel like there are many examples that I've observed myself in the gig economy, whether it's driving for Uber or Lyft, or, you applying for one company, they run a background check, they check your application, you go get a vehicle inspection, you apply for Lyft, and now you have to do all that same stuff over again. It might cost you additional money, it costs them additional money, it costs additional time, when at the end of the day, you're sort of doing literally the exact same job, whether it's for Uber and Lyft. And I'm trying to think if there's any good examples out there, in the world right now where they've optimized that. And I can't really think of any, to be honest. I mean, I guess, okay, I can think of one. You used to, I don't know if you can still do this, but you used to be able to get an Uber vehicle inspection and send that to Lyft. And sometimes they would accept it, even if it was the Uber, kind of like formatting on the page and all that. And sometimes they wouldn't. But, like that was very rare, I feel like.
Yeah. We operate under the premise that employment data is incredibly valuable and should be used in many different contexts and can be used to prove your identity, to prove your income, to prove your employment status. It can be used to prove a lot of things. Yeah. But the difficulty is that it's locked behind all of these ugly closed doors right now and structured in a way that isn't really usable for users or businesses. So a couple of examples of places where our data might be used is in a lending application. So think a mortgage, a mortgage provider. If you're applying for a mortgage today, they need to verify your income and employment, and a user might need to upload a pay stub, or it might just be self-reported data. Neither of those are really great use cases for both the user, who that's difficult to gather, or the business. It's tough to validate that information, and it's not actually that helpful. We're trying to solve both of those pain points by creating the connectivity issue that allows a user to grant access to their employment records to these third parties. Yeah. And that makes underwriting easier, it makes the application process easier. Another example that I frequently think of is applying for an apartment. I remember applying for an apartment, I had to put my driver's license and my pay stub and my resume and send it in email. And it just feels incredibly archaic to do something like that. And frankly, a data security issue. Yeah. Shmulik and I were sitting there thinking there has to be a better way to do this.
Got it. And so, I mean, that concept you're describing is, pretty applicable, I guess you would say, to everyone and maybe even beyond the gig economy. So before we get into the future of where Argyle is going, maybe we can take a step back and talk a little bit about right now and maybe fill me in on how does the gig economy fit into Argyle? Is this your sole focus right now, a main focus, a small focus, a starting point? How are you guys thinking about the gig economy?
Sure. So our business has been around for about 3 years now, and the gig economy is near and dear to our heart because it's where our business started. I talked through that initial use case. So when we were first building the technology, we started building integrations into the gig platforms and making it easy for gig workers to pipe out that data. We then started working with companies who primarily lenders or financial institutions who use this data to underwrite loans. So lender X said, I need to verify an Uber driver's work patterns and income history. They started using that data. And then they started asking us the question, well, now that we're using this data to underwrite Uber drivers or Lyft drivers, can we use it to underwrite Walmart employees? Got it. Or Starbucks employees or employees of the Rideshare guy? So from Argyle's perspective, the difference between 1099, W-2, that's a classification, a government classification and an IRS classification. we're less interested in the distinctions between those two. We're more interested in the ability to transfer work information for any type of worker. So I would say, historically gig focus, but we're now expanding far beyond there and have spent a considerable amount of time doing that.
Got it. So two quick questions come to mind. The first one, so a financial institution I guess the data that a financial institution, for example, is getting about a gig worker or a Walmart worker, it sounds like you're kind of accelerating that process, right? Like you said, right? Someone could go and pull all their statements and then send it to them, and you'd have to verify it, and there'd be this big back and forth. Is there unique data that you're getting, or are you just kind of accelerating that process, securing it, and kind of adding on to that part?
Yeah, if you think about the data that could be transferred today, or the methods by which it could be transferred, it's self-reported data, or it's pay stub data, or it's screenshots. So I actually think the nature of transfer makes the data inaccessible itself. Nobody is going to go and screenshot every trip that they've ever done for Uber and send that in an email to a bank. No bank is ever going to digest all of that information. So the information that we're accessing is nothing that a user or a gig worker themselves couldn't access. But by making it easy to transfer, by creating a programmatic solution, we're actually opening up the possibilities of what a business could digest.
Yeah. And then the second part of that question is the financial institution. I guess it would sort of have to be someone who's focused on the segments that overlap with you, right? Because if you go to a bank, and maybe you tell me if I'm wrong, but if you're a Bank of America and you look at your customer profile, maybe 1 or 2 or 3% are gig economy, probably less than 1% are Walmart workers. So have you had more success, going to the big companies that have, millions of people and a small percentage can still be meaningful? Or are you focused on, companies and or products and service companies that are focused on the gig economy or focused on Walmart workers?
Today, I think the question that you're bringing up is a question of what we call coverage, or what portion of Americans do we have access to pull information for? And today we have the potential, again, we're a user consent-based system, so we only pull data for in instances where a user provides us consent. But we have the potential to pull access for about 50 million Americans. So that's about a third of the working US population. So when you think about from a business perspective, only a portion of that are gig workers. Of that 50 million, maybe 5 or 10 million of those are gig workers. So that's a small percentage of our coverage today. But, when you say, hey, you cover a third of working Americans, that's pretty meaningful for a business who can, completely change how their underwriting algorithms, or their, how they think about insurance or collections for insurance, and for instance.
And to build that coverage, is it through partnering with, I guess like Walmart's, gig companies, I guess you have to partner with a number of big players, right, to get to that 50 million number?
So we spend our day building integrations into all of those payroll systems, or employers, or gig platforms. Our legal relationship is with the end user. So the end user is the one who's authorizing for us to pull that information out and transfer it. We don't work directly with employers.
Got it. Because I think that I know the analogy that I've liked to describe Argyle in the past is kind of like a plaid for the gig economy. And I think a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, may be familiar with plaid, right? Because you're actually entering your, so I guess like if we look at it from like an Uber or Lyft, maybe an example is helpful. If I'm an Uber or Lyft driver and I'm using a service, I'm trying to get a loan that's integrated with Argyle, it's actually going to ask me to log in to my Uber driver account, right? And pull that data.
Exactly. On the plaid point, hopefully the pun of our name is not lost on people. Argyle, we take a lot of inspiration for plaid and respect a lot of what they've done. But yes, we can talk about the user journey. It probably will help paint a picture for folks. So imagine you're going through an application experience. This could be any sort of application. It could be a loan application, insurance application, a rental application. Somewhere within that application, there will be a button that says connect your payroll accounts. The user will click that button, and then Argyle will pop up. It's a white labeled solution. You will, in that white labeled widget, you'll search for within that white labeled solution, we'll ask you a prompt of where do you make money? And you'll go and you'll search for any employer that you work for. So, you search for, I'd search for Argyle, you could search for Walmart, you could search for USPS. once you find wherever you make money, we say, great, please provide your credentials into that employment platform, whether it's partners.uber.com or whether it's myadp.com or one.walmart.com. A user would then provide their credentials into that system, and we would say, great, a secure connection has now been created. You've authorized Argyle to transfer this information to whatever digital application you are a part of. Now that business can digest your information to complete your application.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's super helpful, because I think the interesting thing to note too is that when you're, I guess, on that employer widget, right, and selecting all the companies that you work for, I guess Argyle is that what you call them, employers? Argyle isn't necessarily partnered with all of those companies, right? You're basically just going to help me log in to the back end of all of those companies to pull the data, right?
Correct. We operate, now we're getting into the legal jurisdiction of this, but we operate under the premise that users own their data, not the platforms. And this is spelled out in legislation like CCPA. Mm-hmm. It's where data ownership rights are trending. This is explicitly called out in Dodd-Frank for banking data. And so we say users own the data. They can authorize third-party assistants, automated third-party assistants, to transfer that information to other places where they want that to go. So our legal relationship is with that end user.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a user. I've kind of gone and select, okay, I work for Uber, I work for Lyft, I work for DoorDash, and then I type those in, or I select those, and then it asks me for my credentials to log in. And I guess it's important to note, as you mentioned, right? So Argyle isn't actually viewing any of this data, right? I mean, it's sort of just coming through. I mean, I guess the user, myself, owns this data is the better way to put it, right? Like you said. And then maybe I'm applying for a loan, like you said, and then that lending institution is now going to have access to look at my employment history so that they can verify, underwrite, whatever it may be, so that I can now get that loan using my gig employment data, right?
Exactly. That's exactly the flow.
Yeah.
I should come and have you sell for Argyle. That was a great pitch. We like to say we're doing our job if a user is living in our platform for 10 seconds, and if the user doesn't really know that we exist. They come in, they say who they work for, they type in their credentials, and then they move on to whatever the remaining part of the application experience is.
Yeah. Do you think there's a simpler way to explain it? I'm just curious, because I mean, like, it kind of, like even someone like myself, like I'm pretty familiar with the product, but it does seem like, maybe it's just one of those products that's like, there's a little complexity that, it kind of takes to explain, these different aspects. Do you agree with that? Or do you think that's just sort of how it is?
I would say that the market right now is undergoing a shift, and there is a lot of education required. I think folks have not thought traditionally about users as owning the data, and as such, when we talk to our customers and we talk to potential customers, there's an education curve that's required there to inform them of that, and then exactly what the end product looks like. On the other hand, I think, we referenced Plaid before and other banking aggregators. They have made it more normalized for businesses to think about operating in this way, as well as for users to be entering their credentials into third-party applications.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I appreciate the explanation. And I was wondering if there are any examples or sort of real life examples or case studies that you can share, specifically related to the gig economy. Like basically, how does Argyle help, gig workers, get better deals or get better underwriting or get better financial products? I'm curious if you can share any examples.
Sure, absolutely. We work with a number of providers who exclusively serve the gig economy space. Mm-hmm. So I'll bring up one example is a company called Moves Financial. Mm-hmm. Moves provides loans specifically for gig workers, and I think this has been traditionally a difficult place to operate in. Gig workers have not had access to affordable places of credit. Mm-hmm. Their options are limited to, payday lenders. Yeah. And I think part of that is payday lenders come with very high APR, bad terms. Part of that is because some of them are predatory, but also part of that is because they're operating in the dark. They don't have a lot of information to underwrite individuals on. So Moves has a really great model where they can now offer gig workers affordable credit as a result of having transparency through Argyle to see how much money is somebody making, how consistently are they working, what's their rating on Uber. Using information like their name, their date of birth, to do their KYC checks
Mm-hmm.
or fraud checks. So all of those things are pieces of data that moves would use to underwrite gig workers.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I think the financial and insurance underwriting is sort of like, it seems to me like very obvious, how those companies would kind of use this data and how it kind of benefits not only the gig workers for sure, but also the companies, and, just I think allows them to lend more, more consistently. I think it really improves everything for everyone. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on the podcast, though, is because I feel like with this type of data, from consumers and from these gig workers, it opens up a number of opportunities, right? Like I kind of imagine that, just off the top of my head, right? Like if I'm a company that only wants to hire 4.9 star rated Uber and Lyft drivers, boom, I integrate with Argyle, and now I can see, not only which drivers are 4.9 star rated, but, I can see how much they're earning on average per hour and pay them more to come work for my company, right? And that's literally just one I thought off the top of my head, which is actually a pretty good idea now that I'm saying it, if anyone is listening. But, it just seems like it opens up a lot of really cool opportunities for not only the gig economy, but to sort of, allow workers to leverage their time, leverage their money, leverage their experience. Whereas in the past, you could be 4.9 on, Uber and have 25,000 trips and nobody cares, right?
Exactly. I think we talk to customers all the time about what's possible on this platform,
Mm-hmm.
and our customers and our prospects are the most creative, and they come up with new solutions every day, which is part of what's really fun about this business.
Yeah.
Other use cases that you may not have thought of that folks have come to us with, or think like insurance collections.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult for insurers to verify whether somebody was on a job and therefore covered, right? You can now see that with work history data. Or, what you're bringing up, job platforms or HR platforms. Think if somebody applied for a job and you could say, hey, this person is verified to have worked for Uber. They work these hours. They have this rating. It gives somebody who's hiring a lot more transparency. It also, we work with some job marketplaces who say, hey, this driver, I can see when you're working. I can see how much money you want to be making. I can help give you access to the type of job postings that we think will align well with your work habits.
Yeah. No, I've seen a number of companies kind of mention that they were looking into working with Argyle, or, have told me that they're thinking about working with or are working with Argyle, and, the possibilities really are endless. And so I'm really excited for that future, and to kind of see what, it's obviously, as it takes a little bit of work to get it from the idea stage to the product and then out to hundreds, if not thousands of drivers. But I will say there's some really cool stuff on the horizon. It does seem like, though, with the gig economy specifically, like if you're a Walmart employee, like pulling your work history and data seems pretty straightforward. I think the integration with Argyle still makes a lot of sense, but it's kind of like, how much you made, how much you worked. It seems like with the gig economy, there's a lot more, I guess you would say, rich data. Like you mentioned, you can see when, I didn't even think about the insurance use case, right? You can see when someone is on or off a trip, right? Like a lot of insurance companies now, so to become an Uber and Lyft driver, you just need regular auto insurance. Although you probably want to get rideshare insurance. But if you if you get into an accident and you call Geico just as a normal human being, one of the screener questions they ask you is if you've been working for Uber and Lyft, right? And so I could kind of imagine, a future in which it's like, okay, we need to verify, if you've worked for Uber and Lyft. What are some of the interesting or, like quickly, some of the data points that you can actually pull for gig workers specifically when they're integrating through Argyle that might not be apparent?
Yeah, oftentimes this question of who pays you or putting Argyle is the first question that some of our customers will ask their applicants, whether that's somebody is applying for a bike lease or a car or a loan or insurance, because there's just a lot of data you can then pull out to auto-populate a lot of other things that you may have asked that applicant otherwise. So, we break up the data that we're able to pull into profile information or personal information. So think facts about an individual. You can also see activity level information. So for a W-2, this would be a shift, but activity level information for a gig worker would be every trip that person does, including, the location, time, amount, earnings accrued during that trip. And then lastly, we can pull payout information. So, gross, net, taxes, how much has an individual earned and deposited into their bank account.
And I guess the nice thing is that a lot, or basically all of this data is kind of going to be used in a positive manner for the gig worker or whoever is the end consumer because they're opting into it, right? Like you aren't going to
Exactly.
opt into using the service if it's something that's going to kind of harm you negatively, right?
Yeah, we don't want this to feel Big Brother-esque, and that's part of why we're building a user permission system.
Right.
We really feel, and the mission that we're on as a company is to say, hey, worker, W-2 worker, 1099 worker, you have a lot of very valuable information that you're sitting on. Go and harness that, use that to get access to the products and services that you deserve.
Right. I mean, I think we've used a lot of the buzzwords, right? Data, privacy. I mean, so that kind of makes me think of like, what are, I would say drawbacks, but what are the concerns like that you guys are thinking about? Okay, we're building this product. Like what data or privacy concerns do we need to take into account to, either make sure that this doesn't get into the wrong hands or that users feel that they're not going to be taken advantage of? Like, obviously I'm sure some people have brought up some concerns. So I'm curious to know what you're hearing from your users and kind of what you guys are doing to mitigate some of that.
Yeah. We think of data security and compliance as a core feature of the product, not an obstacle. It's built into everything that we do, from how we think about encryption and data storage, how we transfer this information. We use military grade security across our entire system. From I think the other big piece here is, what does consent mean? And we're very upfront with saying, hey, user, by using this system, you're transferring this type of information to the third party, and we surface that to a consumer. They click the button, continue. So it makes it clear what they're using and what's being transferred on their behalf.
And I guess it's also important to note that you guys aren't necessarily aggregating or working with any of this data. It's all with third parties, right? Like you guys, how do you describe yourself? As the layer in between a third party and a consumer, or how do you look at it?
We call ourselves, we're the trains and the train tracks. And you put the cargo on the train, and we've built the tracks, and you tell us where to take that cargo, and we drive it there. We don't do anything else with that cargo. We don't sell the cargo. We don't aggregate the cargo. We just take the cargo wherever that user wants us to take it. So if they say, I want you to take it to Moves Financial, we move it there. If a user says, hey, I no longer want you to have access to this data, which some users do, they go in and they disconnect accounts. Then, again, we are a user permission service, so we would go in and delete all data associated with that user.
Got it. And I'm curious if early on in the company, or maybe even it's on the future of the roadmap, is there ever, I guess a product or a service that you guys have considered that would make it worth it for you to aggregate some of that data, or sort of, kind of take on some of that role? Or do you envision yourselves as always like connecting the two groups?
There's plenty to play in with moving information from point A to point B. And that's what's on our roadmap for now. What we spend most of our time doing is that 50 million number I gave you. Yeah. We want that, or that third of Americans, we want that to be 100%, or as close to 100% as possible. That's what we spend our time thinking, is we want every worker to be able to use this system if they wanted to.
Got it. Very cool. So in kind of wrapping up here, that 50 million, I'm curious to know like kind of what that 50 million looks like right now. If you can kind of share, like, I'm not exactly sure what, that 50 million looks like right now. And how do you get to the point in the future where, you have basically every American worker, it sounds like, kind of on this platform, or using this platform indirectly, right? That's the
daily work of our team. So we've got over 50 engineers who spend their day building and making these integrations.
Okay. So this would be with all the employers?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so we've set a target for 18 months from now to have access, or to be able to pull information for any American that wants to use this system. So that's the march that we're on right now.
And so is that sort of going to be a number, like I'm assuming that a lot of people can log into ADP, right? Like when I used to work for Boeing, I would log into ADP, I believe. Is that just one integration and that unlocks, millions, if not tens of millions of potential workers, or how does that work?
I wish it were that simple. ADP is, if we're getting into ADP specifically, ADP is actually a company put together by Wall Street that has hundreds of employment platforms that sit underneath them.
Got it.
The largest of those platforms is MyADP, but even MyADP has hundreds of different versions. So there is a very long tail of integrations that need to be built to amass this coverage. It's not so simple as building into the top 5 payroll providers and you're there. Now, we bring that up at the tail end of this podcast because this is the complexity that we don't want our user to have to feel, and we don't want our customer, the business, to have to feel. We deal with wading through all of these different versions and systems and authentication methods so that it's a seamless user experience and that the business that is our customer is delivered a normalized data set.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me because it's almost I guess I would think of it as kind of a 3-sided marketplace in a way where you have your consumers, you've got all of your employers that you kind of, it sounds like it's just, it seems like all the tasks there are pretty defined. It's just going to take, 50 engineers working for, long hours to kind of, slowly or hopefully quickly integrate all of those different services. Then I'm assuming there's kind of a front-facing sales cycle that's looking for companies financially, like we talked about the lenders, the financial products and insurance companies are 2 good examples. People getting mortgages, right? It seems like, I'm assuming that's the third leg of the stool, finding those potential partners that then when you go to them, you say, hey, we have coverage for 300 million Americans, whenever someone comes to get a loan from you in the future, if you have this Argyle integration, then, we can kind of like instantly pull almost no matter 90% chance, for example, we have who they're working for.
That's exactly right. That's a nice encapsulation of the business.
Very cool. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Billy. And if people want to learn more about Argyle, what they're up to, what's the best way, how should they reach out to you or the company or learn more?
Sure. Please go to argyle.com. You can create your own account, start playing around with the system yourselves.
Very cool.
You can, we've got a contact sales button and somebody from our team will get in touch, or you can email me directly at billy@argyle.com. And I look forward to hearing from anybody.
Very cool. Appreciate you sharing all the details, all the info, and I'm going to have to, I actually have already tested it out myself, I think, with a couple of the gig products, but I'm sure I'll be seeing more and more of it in the future. So wish you guys the best.
Thanks so much, Harry.